Listen, if you don't care about how your money is spent or how much the state is going to waste of it, then this video isn't for you. But if you're a citizen of Minnesota who is interested in whether or not, after spending a $19 billion state budget surplus and raising taxes by $10 billion, and increasing the state budget by 40%, and making such an unstable fiscal future situation that we can't even correct a $15 million tax bill error because we're not sure we're going to be able to afford it, then this might be for you. You might want to find out how Democrats, after doing all of that in the state of Minnesota, are still looking at spending tons and tons of untold billions of dollars. Stay tuned. So I want to walk you through a committee hearing that I was part of as a member of the House of Representatives here in Minnesota yesterday. And this was a joint meeting between let me make sure I get it right, the Children and Families Committee, which I sit on, and the House Economic Development Committee. And the purpose of this joint committee hearing was to behold a presentation, behold the pageantry on display of this brand new idea, this brand new scheme to pay for everybody's childcare. We're just going to pay for it, just everybody's childcare. We're just going to pay for it as a state of Minnesota. That should be cheap, right? Maybe. We don't know. We don't know is actually the answer. And that's kind of what I want to get at here is we heard a sales pitch, which as a member of the Children and Families Committee, I've heard this sales pitch before. I've heard the first 80% of this sales pitch about 15 times over the course of the past year or so. What I've never heard is the last 20%, which is usually where you start to talk about price. All right, here's what it's going to cost. Here's how we're going to finance it. Here's whether or not you can afford it. That's really the crucial component of any given value proposition. Like, you can highlight features and benefits all day long, but if you never actually tell me what it's going to cost me, then I'm not in a position where I can make any sort of informed decision regarding whether or not it's actually a good idea. You know, there's all sorts of products and services out there that if all you do is look at their features and benefits and you never look at their price tag, I'm sure we'd all say, sounds great, right? But that's the function that price serves, is to actually communicate to us whether or not we can afford something and whether or not it's worth the cost. Now, I'm going to start here by kind of showing you bits and pieces of the sales presentation that they made, and then we'll pivot to when I asked them, what's the price tag, right? So let's start with the sales pitch.
You know, this issue, it's a tremendous challenge, not only for Minnesota families, but it does have a direct impact on our economy. And in fact, a study that was actually published last February, so now the numbers might be a little bit out of date, but it estimates that the U.S. economy loses about $122 billion when parents leave the workforce or even reduce their hours to care for young children. Currently, Minnesota is ranked 4th out of 50 states for the most expensive infant care. In contrast with the average annual cost of college tuition, which is $11,226, or like Chair Hassan mentioned already, housing, about $11,137, infant care in Minnesota costs on average just over $16,000 a year. So last year, Chair Pinto already alluded to some of the work that we've done.
So let me pause there just for a second to highlight that you continually see this, where they're very keenly aware and eager to highlight how much it costs families to pay for their child care. And yet later on, when I deign to ask the question of, well, how much would it cost the state to do the same? It's not just that I don't get an answer, okay? And that, spoiler alert, I don't get an answer. It's not just that. It's the seeming unpreparedness from everyone involved. Like, no, they seem to be genuinely confused by the question and flummoxed by the fact that I'm asking it, as if it's never even occurred to them that this is going to have a cost.
Of the lowest income families through investments in childcare assistance, early learning scholarships, Head Start, and school-based pre-K. Our nation-leading child tax credit is going to cut childhood poverty in Minnesota by over 1/3. I'm proud of the work that we did for our most vulnerable children, and that work continues. However, we know that there is a huge gap in support for almost 75% of Minnesota families who make too much money to qualify for these existing programs, but not nearly enough to afford both childcare and other necessities. You may be familiar with the federal standard for childcare affordability. We spend a lot of time in the Children and Families Committee talking about that for folks in economic development. That might be new for you, but this is a national standard that came down from the Trump administration and also the Biden administration. And last week at our bipartisan kickoff at the University of Minnesota, one of our speakers, the former CEO of Ecolab, he said, I don't think that the Trump and Biden administrations have agreed on much, but this statistic is one of those things. So we're using great information here, bipartisan information, and I think we can go forward feeling good about that. In Minnesota, the median family with an infant is spending 21% of their annual income. And if that family also has a preschooler, that reaches 37% of their annualized family income. These huge childcare bills arrive at a time of life when young families are just getting established, and often parents are at the start of their earning capacity early in their careers. Since I've started talking more publicly about this issue, I've heard so many stories. Do take a look in your packets. There's a lot of information, but we've got a lot of great testifiers to come here and share their stories today as well. But I've heard from people who have made their family planning decisions based on childcare, about people who have dropped out of the workforce and walked away from careers that they love because it just doesn't make sense to work when childcare is so expensive, about families being forced to take whatever care they can get instead of the quality care that they want, and even about one family that lost their home and moved out of state in part because they just missed qualifying for an early learning scholarship. Families in all of our communities across the state are experiencing these difficulties, and we can and must address the childcare affordability issue to help every child in Minnesota get off to a great start.
Okay, so can and must. Must, maybe. Can, what's your basis for that? And it's how can you say that with such confidence we can do it when later, as you'll see, when I ask how much is this going to cost, or I suggest we should probably know what it's going to cost and how it's going to affect the state budget and how sustainable it is going forward generationally, will we be able to keep this promise if we make it? It's largely crickets and gobbledygook that I get in response. They do not know that we can do this. If they did know that we can do this, they would show us that we can do this. And yet that part of the presentation never comes.
House File 3681 builds on the existing and successful Early Learning Scholarship Program and the Great Start Task Force recommendations, which are our blueprint for creating a system that works for parents, kids, and our childcare workforce. The proposal would help families earning up to 150% of the state median income, which is about $174,000 a year for a family of four. It makes use of our existing providers, including licensed centers, home providers, Head Start programs, public school programs, and also tribally licensed childcare. Provider stability is a hallmark of this bill. And in order to support best our childcare businesses, we have included a number of best practices, including a couple from North Dakota, which include paying prospectively and making sure that our providers have the money that they need for running their programs ahead of time instead of retroactively having to request and wait on some of these payments.
All right, so now we're going to take a look at some of the testimony from various stakeholders, parents, And again, I don't contest anything that you're about to hear in terms of the claims from these folks telling their personal stories. The question becomes, to what end? And then what? Like, how are we going to fix this problem? And that's an answer that is just never provided.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Pinto, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Karina Bleda. I'm a mother, a student, an advocate, a future lawyer, and I'm delighted to share my story with y'all. A number of women motivated me to be here today. I'm here for the mothers across Minnesota who deserve better. I'm here for my mom, who taught me the value of hard work and who has provided me with affordable childcare for the last 3 years. I'm here for my daughter, Luna, who deserves a better future and more time with a mom who is less stressed. Minnesota is failing families. We're trapped in a broken cycle. We need education to secure a better future for ourselves and our children, but we need childcare in order to go to school and to go to work. And we need to work full-time to just afford this expensive childcare. And the cycle continues. We expect mothers to do the impossible, to attend school full-time, work full-time, raise a family full-time, as if we're not bound with the same 24 hours a day everyone else is.
Okay. I think I might have found the problem. Because she's not wrong. We expect women to be everything and do everything and achieve it all and carry all the burden. We expect women to be Atlas, holding the world on their shoulders. We didn't always expect that. There was a time in society, and that time happened to be the vast majority of human civilization, the vast majority of history, where we did not expect women to do it all. This is a modern phenomenon. And, there may be women who want to do everything, and God bless you. You go, girl, right? Like if that's your goal and you want to try to achieve it, I wish you the best, and let's see what we can do to help you. But the women in my life, the conversations that I have with the women that I know, including my own wife, and just our own family experience. I mean, everybody's telling their stories here today, right? So, I'll tell a little bit of mine. My wife, our journey together began with her thinking she wanted to do everything. And I was 100% behind it. I was like, okay, then let's do everything. Let's get you doing everything then, if that's what you want to do. Let's get you living the life you want to live. And what she discovered about the time we got married, about the time we became pregnant, she became pregnant with our first child, is that suddenly there was a shift in priority. And the drive to be the girl boss very quickly diminished. And all she really wanted to do, all she really cared about was being there for our son. And being there as much as she possibly could be, as much as it was economically possible. And that's kind of at the root of what a lot of these stories are getting at, is that people have to make decisions. They have to balance their values. Yes, that's true. That's always been true. And it always will be true to some degree, even if we move forward with a scheme like this. It's still going to be true that you're going to have to make choices between doing A or doing B. And some of those choices are going to be difficult. Some of those choices are going to be painful. We're never going to remove that from our lives. But what I guess the point that I'm trying to suggest here is that perhaps the cultural expectation that this testifier is speaking to, perhaps that's a wrong expectation. Perhaps we shouldn't be laying that burden on our wives, our mothers, our sisters, our neighbors, the women in our society. Maybe.
My mother taught me that through hard work, sacrifice, you can achieve your goals. She was a Salvadorian immigrant who didn't speak English, yet managed to open a thriving grocery store. She worked around the clock to provide me and my siblings with a better life. Today, she continues to support me by taking care of my daughter. It is the only way I'm able to make ends meet. Even with the support here, there are moments where I just live paycheck to paycheck. The pace I have kept since the birth of my daughter is, in a word, unsustainable. I wake up at 6 a.m., feed my daughter, pump breast milk, get her ready for the day, pack my lunch, dinner. From 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., I work as a stockbroker's assistant, where I get only 15 minutes of break just for pumping and eating and a quick call to check on Luna. I'm home by 7:30. I feed my daughter. I spend half an hour with her, and then she goes to bed. And then at 8 p.m., it's time to do some schoolwork. I usually study until 1 a.m., and then I cross my fingers that Luna sleeps throughout the night so I can get my work done. And then the next day, I wake up at 6 a.m., and I do it all over again. At one point, the stress of this relentless pace, wounded me up at the ER, and the doctor told me I need to stress less. I need to take a vacation. And that's like telling me to fly to the moon.
Again, I feel like there's a lot of blind spots in this proposal and in the way we're talking about this topic that properly ought to be illuminated. And one of those blind spots is, well, why is she in that situation? How have we failed her as a people, as a community, that she finds herself in a situation where she's running around like a chicken with its head cut off, barely seeing her own child. And that's the real tragedy, right? Is she talks about being able to see her baby for half an hour a night, 30 minutes. One of the first presentations that we heard as a committee, Children and Families Committee in 2023, in fact, the first presentation at the first committee hearing, was a pediatrician, as I recall, talking about parenthood and talking about, amongst the points he was making, the exponential decrease in time spent with parents as children grow older. The overwhelming majority of the time that you will ever spend with your child is spent in those early years. And, as a father of a 14-year-old son and a 10-year-old son, actually my eldest just turned 15, so theoretically we only have 3 more years with him. The time flies. Any parent who has gone through this knows it. And you look back, I find myself looking back and thinking, could I have done more to spend more time with my kid? Could I have been a bigger part of his life? Could I have had more of an influence? How much did I prioritize coming to work or engaging in any of a dozen other activities at the exclusion of being with him, spending time with him? Now, the fact of the matter is, again, we all have to make tough choices about how to spend our time and how to spend our resources. And often the balance is such that we do have to step away from our kids to go to work or engage in whatever activity is for them, right? Like trying to make the world a better place, trying to provide for them financially. Just because you're not physically with them doesn't mean you're not working for them. But the point remains that there is some degree of tragedy in not being wanting to have more time with your kid than you are able to have. And so again, the question that I ask is, how have we failed as a community and as a society by putting this mother in this position? And, I feel as though if I actually were to ask that question of, for instance, Representative Katiza Wattoon, she would probably say something along the lines of, exactly, Walter, that's why I'm bringing forward this policy, right? Because we're going to do something about it. But the proposal that's being offered, even if you set the notion of price aside, which they most certainly have at this point, they don't talk about it. A government program is a pretty cold, pretty sanitary and clinical response to what is a human relational problem. And, she talks about her mom providing assistance with childcare. My mother-in-law provided a lot of assistance for my wife and I, for both our kids as they were growing up with childcare. And we would have had a really tough time if we didn't have that option. I know a lot of people don't. But there was a time when that type of support, like organic community support, organic family support, church support, faith community support, was a given. That's how we took care of business, is we took care of each other. You didn't have to have legislation compelling the community to step up and take care of its own children. And that's in effect what this is. We're saying that because we can't figure it out amongst ourselves as a community of people in relationship, because we can't come alongside each other and take care of each other, we're going to systemize it. We're going to turn it into a program. We're going to make it a state agency's responsibility to make up for our lack of caring for each other. And maybe that does end up having to be the solution, but if it is, what a testament to who we've become. Like, what? Who in your life, this testifier, who is she in your life? Like, what person in your life can tell a story like hers that you're not coming alongside and helping? That we aren't coming alongside and helping? Not because there's legislation saying we have to, not because the tax man comes and takes our cash and redistributes it to her, but because we care about her.
My name is Elena Skoglund. I am the parent of a young son and a childcare teacher and a leader with Kids Count on Us. I appreciate the opportunity to share my story with you today. I am a full-time teacher at the Early Education Center at Minnesota State Moorhead, where I teach 3 and 4-year-olds. My son Harvey is in the toddler room just down the hall from me. My husband works full-time as a police officer in the city of Holly. My husband and I always wanted to have children close in age. But Harvey is now 2.5 years old, and we're not even considering a second child at the moment. I'm not exaggerating when I say that the cost of childcare is the #1 factor. At the upper end of the pay scale for childcare teachers, I still only make $19.27 an hour. Even with state funding, teacher wages are still largely dependent on what families can afford to pay. And families are paying much more than they can afford. Our childcare costs for just one child eat up 50% of my annual income. If we were to have a second child, my entire salary would go to pay for childcare. We're not an outlier. However, we are the norm. Well, I'm grateful that assistance exists to help families with the lowest incomes. What about the rest of us who make too much to qualify but not enough to live comfortably? Doing everything right, getting a college degree, being in a stable marriage, doing a job that helps my community is no longer enough to scrape by. We are 2 full-time working parents working in careers that are vital to the thriving community, and we can barely afford to support 1 child. We need teachers and we need police officers, and for us and others to do these jobs well, we need and deserve high-quality childcare that is affordable. And as a college-educated childcare teacher, I deserve to earn much more than $19.27 an hour. HF 3681 will provide funding to reduce childcare costs significantly for so many Minnesotan families like mine. I urge you to support this bill and make it possible for families to afford their lives. Thank you.
All right. Now, obviously very powerful testimony. And she's absolutely right. I mean, what she says there, I think, is the crux of our current moment. The fact that you have so many people in our society who did it the right way, who did what they were told, who did what they were told was the right thing to do in order to become a productive, contributing, but also thriving and prospering member of society. Go to school, get educated, get a good job, start a family, get married, pay your taxes, right? And yet it's still not enough, and people are still struggling and scraping to get by. And so in that context, I don't begrudge anyone who looks at this proposal and says, yep, we definitely need to do this. We definitely need to make childcare affordable for families in Minnesota. What I'm going to suggest is that we take a little bit of time to think about not only how we got here, but what the impact of trying to solve the problem in this way is going to be, and the degree to which it could potentially exacerbate the very problem that testifier just articulated. Why do you think it is that we're suffering from so much inflation? Why do you think it is that it's become so much more difficult to afford the cost of living, to afford housing, to afford childcare, to afford the basic necessities? My dad was the sole breadwinner when I was growing up. I'm 45 years old. Wasn't that long ago. We had a vehicle that worked, two of them, more often than not, two vehicles that got us around. We had a house. We were never hungry. We were always fed. And he was the sole breadwinner. Now, I will grant you, because I'm living in 2024, same as you, that's not as possible today. There are people who do it. They're far and few between. But if you're going to live a comfortable quality of life, then nowadays you need two incomes. Again, the question is why? And I feel like as a society, we're kind of the frog in the pot of boiling water, where we assume that this is just the way it is. You're just supposed to have two income households. You're just supposed to have difficulty in being able to struggle for your basic needs. But that's not the way it's supposed to be, and it's not the way it's always been. And all of this inflation that we're seeing is a direct result of government spending. There's been more government spending, particularly at the federal level, over the last handful of years than the collective government spending of the entire United States of America from its founding. And you can't do that. You can't just crank money out of a printer and shower it on the economy and not expect to see the inflationary pressures that we are seeing. And so by having as your prescribed solution, we're going to spend even more money, we're going to crank it up even more, is only going to exacerbate that problem. Ultimately, the cost of childcare, just like the cost of housing and the cost of food, is not going to go away if you do something like this. It's simply going to be transferred. You're going to transfer it from individual families to the entire state. And that will most certainly make it cheaper for those individual families. But the question is, can the state collectively and sustainably afford that? And what impact the taxes that are going to have to be raised, because they will, in order to fund something like this, the taxes that are going to have to be raised in order to fund something like this will have an impact upon all the same economic forces that put this testifier in that situation to begin with, and put us all in that situation that we find ourselves in right now. So are we making the situation better? Or are we just consoling ourselves with the idea of making it better when we're actually making the contributing factors worse?
Now I'm wearing a button today that says, I'm at work today because I have childcare. And that is literally true for me every day. But it was acutely true for me this week, because 48 hours ago, almost exactly, I got a panic text from my wife because our childcare arrangements had fallen through for yesterday. And we were able to make other arrangements and it worked out. But we know that that's not true for a lot of folks out there. And I just wonder, how many others in this room can say that? How many others outside of this room wish they could say that? I was at the school where my daughter goes to preschool a couple of months ago. And if we think this is not something that Minnesotans talk about, I guarantee you they do. I heard two moms, and I it was difficult to resist jumping in and telling them what I do for my day job. But two moms, literally just talking about how challenging it is to find childcare, how expensive it is, and all of the hoops that they have to jump through just to make things work as parents of young kids. And the fact is that we all interact with the child care system, whether or not we have young kids. And this crisis is holding all of us back. Childcare costs are holding us all back in so many different ways. We know, of course, the ways it's holding back businesses and workers, but it's holding us back on family and community stability, on our ability to do the things that make life worth living, be parents and friends and active and engaged members of our community. And so I'm really excited to see this move forward for that reason alone. But the other point that I want to make, and this is my last one, I promise, because I know we have a very full agenda.
We do.
And those of you who closely follow the property tax division, as I know so many of us do, heard me make this point yesterday, that really this is a case of pay me now or pay me later. We can invest in quality, affordable, accessible early care and education now, or we can put more money later into public assistance programs, into housing, into healthcare, into the criminal justice and correction system, as Chair Pinto knows. Pay me later is always more expensive. It's always harder on our communities, and it always leads to worse outcomes. So I'm excited to see this move forward. Thank you.
All right. So what you're hearing there is the return on investment argument. And this, you'll see me momentarily here ask what I think is a pretty logical question proceeding from that argument. But the idea is that if we spend a lot of money on childcare and early childhood education, that we're going to see decreases in the amounts of money that get spent in later years of these same children's lives on services and keeping them out of the criminal justice system and setting them up to be able to take care of themselves. And that's a fascinating idea. And I'm going to let you percolate on it as this discussion continues here. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Katiza-Watun, for bringing this bill forward and initiating a conversation that's obviously of great importance to many folks here in Minnesota. I think this process works best when we're able to, from across the aisle, kind of illuminate each other's blind spots. I know you guys in the majority have definitely done that for me over the course of the past year, and I hope to return the favor perhaps a little bit here in these comments. So there are multiple blind spots that I detect in the proposal that's before us today, but I'll focus just on two for the sake of time. The first is long-term fiscal sustainability. Many of us were present at the U last Tuesday when we heard a symposium and panels hosted by the leadership of all of our caucuses on this issue of early child learning and child care. And it struck me as a fantastic sales presentation, offering all of the features and benefits of what this proposal could provide for the people of Minnesota. But there was one crucial piece missing that would be present in any actual sales presentation, and that's the price. What does it cost? What am I going to have to give up in order to obtain these features and benefits? And that's reflected in this bill where, of course, we have the blank spaces where appropriations would go. And so the question becomes not just how much this is going to cost us now, but to what extent we're going to be able to maintain such a system moving forward. And those are questions that definitely need to be answered, because when we hear all of these stories that we can all relate to of having to contend with the affordability of a crucial service that our families depend on, by doing this, we are not removing those costs. We're simply transferring them. We're transferring them to the entire state, which is fine if the state can afford it, and if the state can afford it not just today, but tomorrow and 10 years from now and 100 years from now. And so what I would encourage the majority to do is to try to put some thought and actually put some numbers on what this looks like generationally going forward. Like, do we have the capacity not just to kickstart it today, but to ensure that we'll be able to keep promises that we're making to people moving forward? And one of the things I would point to is, frequently, and maybe we'll hear it later when we get into presentations, we hear claims of future return on investment. We had great economic conversations last year about where money comes from and what we can expect in the future. So, if those predictions are true, that we can expect some sort of return on investment in the future, we should be able to quantify at what point can we expect reductions in other areas of the state budget as a direct result of the investments that we're making today. And so I would definitely encourage the majority to look at that. And just one more quick point, I feel as though we might be evading accountability for the impact that public policy has had on the economy and the extent to which that is providing the downward pressure that folks are feeling manifest as difficulty with childcare. Thank you.
All right. So what I want to do now is fast forward a little bit to after the agencies presented, and specifically here I'm asking a question of Jennifer Moses of the Minnesota Children's Cabinet. And, I touch upon this issue, this question of what would it cost? What is the financial need that we're asking the state to consider paying? And I think the response that I get is pretty telling.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Given all the work that the agencies have done in this area, I'm wondering if you can not necessarily give us a specific number, but kind of fill in the gaps a little bit in terms of what you anticipate the overall cost of a program like this may be, and what you anticipate in terms of costs going forward. Has any work been done by the agencies on answering that question?
Go ahead. Representative Hudson, could I ask a question of clarification? The cost of which program? Rep. Hudson?
The cost of the proposal that's before us today in the bill. Obviously, all the work that's being done is leading up to this proposal, and so as it's being considered by the legislature, having some idea of what the resource needs are, and again, I don't expect you to be able to necessarily put a specific number on that program, but clearly there's some sort of sense of what the need is and where the gaps are, and just if there's any sort of economic financial data on that front.
Representative Moses? Representative Hudson, thank you for that clarification. Childcare access and affordability has always been a top priority of this administration. We've referenced some of the historic investments of the last session. We would look forward to working with the author further to understand the impacts of the bill that's before us.
Yeah, so if that didn't sound like an answer to you, it's because it wasn't. And what I find perplexing, and again, I was told by another member on our side that when I was asking that question and just generally asking questions about the cost, that folks on the other side, who I was not looking at, were like scrunching up their brow and looking at each other confused, like they didn't understand what I was asking or why. And it's like, what you put together a joint committee hearing to showcase a bill and then offer presentations that sell the need for that bill. Nowhere in that consideration did you even think to maybe investigate the question of how much it would cost. Like, and again, I try to be as graceful as I can here, but I'm not asking like on the spot in a committee hearing for an agency person or a committee person to sit there and give me an exact appropriation number of what I don't need them to author a fiscal note on the spot. That's not what I'm asking for here. What I'm saying is, you guys have clearly spent all this time and effort in investigating the problem, right? And formulating your arguments around the scope of
the problem. Somewhere in there, have you not at some point actually done the math of here's what it would cost to solve the problem, especially in the way that we're prescribing it be solved? I don't think that's an unreasonable question to ask. I don't think it's a weird question to ask. What I think is weird is that they're not asking it. What I think is weird is that they don't have an answer for it. What I think is weird is that we're only presenting features and benefits and not considering cost and not considering sustainability. And listen, I'm putting this out there as with a lot of context, right? Like, this is not me, I do all kinds of barn burning, ragging on Democrats, and no doubt you've seen plenty of it if this is not your first time on my channels, my social channels. But this is not that. This is a sincere plea to Minnesota to dig into the details of this and to have a more comprehensive conversation about, first of all, how do we get here? How do we get to this crisis in childcare as it's being characterized? What role did we as government play in creating that crisis? And is this prescribed solution that's being developed of simply just paying for everybody's childcare in a way that has no cost control whatsoever? Because we're saying that we're going to pay for, we're going to cap a family's contribution to their own childcare at 7% of their income, and then the state's just going to cover the rest, just whatever that number is. So what, you're going to have childcare providers that go from charging a hypothetical $1,600 a year to what, 32? Just double it overnight, and the state's just going to pay that for every kid? I don't know. They don't know. Nobody can tell you, right? Like, if we're going to have a serious conversation about an area of policy like this, then we need to have a serious conversation. And that is not currently happening. Now, hopefully we'll get there. But what I don't want to see happen is spending all this state time and resources coming up with 80% of a sales pitch that only features the benefits of a prescribed policy and never even acknowledges or pauses to think about the potential cost or the economic impact. That is irresponsible. And if that's what we've gotten to date, then we need a dramatic shift in the trajectory of this conversation. Oh, and by the way, if you appreciate these types of breakdowns, please let me know. This takes a lot of time. And, one of the themes of this conversation is the amount of time that we don't get to spend with our families, don't get to spend with our children. I'm taking time away from my family, taking time away from my kids in order to do this project of putting this together for you. And so if it's of value, please let me know. And the best way you can let me know is by sharing it, by subscribing and following, by liking, and just by supporting me in whatever way you can. That's how I'll know that this is worthwhile, that you find value in it, that it's helping you, and that'll signal to me that I should do more breakdowns like this. Take care.